Good morning. Always good to be with you all. I wonder if you've ever had one of those moments where you knew you had to do something. Like you knew it had to be done and it needed to be you, but you really wish you didn't have to do it. You know what I mean? Like it was something that if there was any way around it, if there was anyone else who was willing to do it for you, you would have gladly let them because it was kind of a hard thing and you would have gladly accepted any other options, right? I mean, anyone know what I'm talking about? I mean, I think we've probably all had moments like that. When Amanda and I were in our mid 20s, we had this house. We bought this house together. It was our first house that we lived in together, and it was this big two-story home built in 1937. It was, this big house with a lot of space and a lot of character, a lot of charm. One of the cool things about this house was that it had a walk-in attic. Right. So on the upstairs hallway, there was like this doorway that led to a stairwell that went up to the attic. It was kind of a neat thing. And so one night while Amanda and I were laying in bed and trying to fall asleep, this would have been like probably 11 o'clock or later. We hear this racket, this commotion coming from the other side of the attic door. And we jump out of bed, we go under the hallway outside of our bedroom door there, and we're looking at the attic door. And I mean, it's like this loud clawing and scratching and on the other side of our attic door. And we had no idea what it was, but it was obviously something wild and it sounded kind of big and it was obviously trying to get into our house. And so we sat there for a minute trying to figure out what to do. And I finally cracked the door open just a little bit to see if I could see inside, to see what was going on. And I opened it and I looked down, and sure enough, at the bottom of the stairwell going up to the attic was this little bat. Right? I had no idea that bats could claw and scratch with their wings, but apparently that's what this little guy was doing. It was much smaller than it sounded. But I looked at this bat and I closed the attic door and I went and got some duct tape and I sealed the attic door closed with duct tape and I went back to bed. Because I figured it's duct tape. What's the bat going to do? It's not getting out of there. And we don't really need the attic. We don't need to ever go up there ever again. We're fine without it. So problem solved, right? Amanda was not real pleased with my solution that evening. And I knew it was just temporary. I was like, it's 11 o'clock. I've got work in the morning. Like, I don't want to have to mess with this right now. So anyway, we went back to bed. We went to sleep and woke up the next morning, went to work. And, the attic door is still sealed shut. The bat's still up there somewhere. And the whole next day at work, I mean, this was weighing on me. I'm like, I got to figure out what to do with this bat. I'm not even sure what to do. I've never had to take care of a bat in the house before. And I'm not even sure how to do this. Like I was online researching how to take a bat out of your house. And it looked like the most popular solution was a tennis racket. Well, I didn't own a tennis racket. I didn't know anybody that owned a tennis racket. So I didn't even love the idea of going up into my dark attic and this bat like swooping at me with me trying to smack it out of the air or something. I didn't love the idea of this. And so I started to get creative and I started to try to think, is there any other way around this? Like maybe there's another way where the bat can come out of the attic, but I don't have to be the one that goes up there. Like maybe there's somebody else who will do this for me. And I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it and realized I was out of options. There was nobody else going to do this for me. There was no other way around it. I was going to have to deal with the bat. Because as I thought more about it, I realized, I'm not okay. I don't want to be the guy who's going to let a bat just live rent-free in his attic, and I'm pretty sure Amanda was not going to let me be that guy. And so I knew that I had to face my destiny, with that bat that evening in my attic. So I spent the rest of the afternoon that day just kind of mentally preparing myself to step into that moment, to be the man, right? And I was prepared. Like I had a plan and I was ready to go for it. But what I didn't know was that earlier that day, in fact, shortly after I left the house that morning, Amanda had called one of her girlfriends who lived around the block, just one of her good friends. And this girl like grew up on a farm in Michigan. And so she had kind of some experience with this sort of thing. And she came over that morning and she went up into our attic with a broom and she swatted that thing out of the attic with a broom. She took care of it that morning. And they never told me. And so I got home that night thinking I was ready to meet my destiny, my date with destiny that night with this bat, which actually turned out to be this big, elaborate, practical joke that everybody was in on at my expense. And I guess, which I kind of had that coming after, the whole duct tape thing. But anyway, it turned out to be kind of a hilarious thing. We got the bat out of there. I mean, but they had a good laugh at my expense, and it was funny. And, we look back on that story. We were talking about it earlier this week, in fact, and we laugh about it even 20 plus years later. But it's actually a great example of how little moments like this move us toward the people that we want to be, right? And I mean, really, that's what life is. And that's what life does, right? I mean, life is really about moving us toward the person that we're destined to become. In little ways and big ways. I mean, life just has a way of moving us toward our destiny. And all of us want that. right? All of us want to move closer to the person that we're destined to become. The only catch is that we can't get there without doing hard things, right? We have to do hard things along the way in order to reach that destiny. And most of us don't want to do these hard things, right? We don't like doing hard things because we really just want our lives to be easy. But at the same time, we also know that life isn't easy, right? I mean, success isn't easy, right? Marriage isn't easy. Relationships in general aren't easy. Greatness isn't easy. In fact, anything worth becoming isn't easy. It will always require us to do hard things. Right, here's just another example of this. I mean, maybe you've seen a photo, maybe you had one of these experiences where you saw like a photo of someone, and maybe it was somebody you've known from a long time ago. Maybe it was like somebody on TV or in a magazine or whatever, and you looked at them and they looked great. They looked like they maybe had lost some weight and they had gotten in shape. And you looked at that, it inspired you, and you thought, okay, that's my destiny, right? I want that. I want to be that. That's the person that I'm destined to become. And it sounds great, and we love the idea and we're committed to that. But there's two problems that stand between us and that destiny: diet and exercise. Just those two things, right? And it almost kind of sounds simple, right? Like that's all I have to do, just diet and exercise. Well, let's go. That sounds fine. But then at the end of the day, when I'm sitting down wanting to binge watch Netflix with a package of double stuffed Oreos, that's when I realize diet and exercise are really hard things to do. Right? And of course, I'm speaking from personal experience there. And it's in those moments when we start to realize how hard these things really are that if you're like me anyway, we start to think maybe I can step into my destiny without doing the hard things. In other words, maybe there's a way out of this. Right? Like maybe there's another way where I can still eat what I want and do what I want and still become the fit and healthier me that I'm destined to be. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Of course, we all know it doesn't work like that. We're going to have to do the hard things to get there. But that's just the reality when it comes to moving toward our destiny. There's always a series of problems or challenges that stand between our current selves and our future destined selves. Because for many of us, we'll never reach our life goals if we don't do the hard things like going to school and finishing our degrees and things like that. And some of you are in the midst of that, like you're in the thick of it now, and whether it's your undergrad or graduate studies, and you know how hard it is, the hard things that you have to do to get there, right? But then we also just look at our relationships, right? We can't be the parents that we're destined to be without doing really hard things like learning patience and selflessness and sleeplessness, right? Like learning how to function on zero sleep. We can't even be the friend or the spouse that we're destined to be without doing really hard things, like choosing humility and vulnerability and authenticity in those relationships. And none of us can step into our future without leaving behind our past and stepping out of our present. And so often those are very hard things to do. And all of us want to become the person that we're destined to be, but at some point we'll look at those problems in front of us, those hard things that stand between us and our destiny, and we'll think, maybe there's another way. Like maybe we can get around this, and really we're just looking for a way out because we think the path toward our destiny should be easy. But human beings aren't actually wired this way. We're not wired for the easy path. In fact, there's recent research out there right now in the field of neuroscience, and I'm going to get kind of nerdy here for just a second. But there's some research out there in the field of neuroscience that's indicating that this part of our brain that plays kind of a central role in our willpower and tenacity and things like that. This part of our brain that's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Right? They're saying that this part of our brain is actually activated when we engage in behaviors that we don't like to do and don't want to do. In fact, what they're discovering is that this part of our brain will actually expand only when we do the hard things that we don't want to do. Right? And what they're finding is that if we do the hard things that we do want to do, it doesn't expand. There's no growth there. But when we do the hard things that we don't want to do and don't like doing, then our brain increases. So think about this. You can actually increase your brain capacity by doing the hard things that you would much rather someone else do for you, or much rather finding a way out of, right? This is how our brain grows and how we develop. I mean, it's like we're hardwired for hard things to move us toward the person that we're destined to become, which is just fascinating to me. And now for those of us who are followers of Jesus, I mean, now we step back and we look at this from a spiritual perspective. And maybe this is why Jesus was always pressing into the hard things in life. I mean, you would think that Jesus would tell us, like life is going to get easier if you'll just trust me and put your life into my hands. But he doesn't do that. Instead, over and over again, he tells us to do really hard things like we talked about last week when Jesus said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. You know, if somebody takes your coat, then go ahead and give them the shirt off your back while they're at it. And if they slap you across the face, then turn the other cheek. I mean, over and over again, Jesus presses in and says, there's just no way around this. No way out of it. If you want to become the person you're born to be, the person I created you to be, if you want to move toward your destiny, then you're going to have to do hard things. And Jesus not only talked this, but he lived it. And there's no greater example of that in his life than the scene that I want to look at with you together this morning. And for the past couple of weeks, we've been dropping in on the life of Jesus with his disciples, or these guys who were like his apprentices, the 12 disciples. And today we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. And Jesus and his friends have just finished their Last Supper together. And now they've arrived at this spot just outside of the city of Jerusalem, a spot where they would often go together. Jesus, one of his favorite spots that he would often go to. But we watch Jesus in this moment. And what's interesting is that we start to see a very relatable side of him. I mean, we've already seen his divine side, the divine side of Jesus, right? I mean, in both of the scenes that we looked at the past couple of weeks, Jesus seemed to have this divine foresight, this insight that gave him full awareness of everything that was going to happen to him. It hadn't happened yet, but he knew it was coming. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we started this short little 3-part teaching series called The Cup. And we've been looking at these moments in the journey of Jesus toward the end of his life when he used the metaphor and the visual of a cup. And every time the cup is mentioned, Jesus is referring to something that hasn't happened yet, but he knows it's going to happen, and it has to happen for him to fulfill his destiny. And so the cup of Jesus became this symbolic reference to the mission of Jesus. It's basically why he came and what he had to do. And the cup comes up again for the third and final time in the scene that we're about to look at. And it's another glimpse at his divinity, his full awareness of everything that was coming his way over the next few hours. But as his hour approaches, something shifts within him. And we see another side of Jesus in this moment. And so let's look at this together. Again, we're looking at the biography of Jesus written by the first century disciple named Mark. This is Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." We'll pause here for just a moment. And now, in this moment, we begin to see a very human side of Jesus. Right? I mean, when Jesus goes to this olive grove, this place called Gethsemane, this place that he would go to very often with his disciples, I mean, now he's beginning to display some very real and raw and relatable human emotions, right? I mean, it says he was deeply distressed. He was troubled. And one of my favorite Bible translators, a guy named Eugene Peterson, he took this and he gave it a little bit of a different twist to help us really feel what Jesus was going through here. It says, he sank into a pit of suffocating darkness. And can you imagine what he was feeling in this moment? I mean, yes, Jesus is the Son of God, fully God in human flesh, but he is also fully human. And we see that so clearly here in a way that I find so moving. And it's like moments before his execution, Jesus is just pouring out his heart to his closest friends. And it's like he just rips open his chest and he begins to bear his struggles and his agony and his fears of facing his own death. And this intensifies as we keep reading verse 35. Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And this is the final mention of the cup. And we've been saying throughout this series that the cup was this metaphor used to symbolize the sorrow and suffering that Jesus would endure on the cross. But here in this moment, the cup meant much more than just physical death and suffering. In fact, it was a cup of wrath that he would drink as he hung on the cross in that moment when he would take on himself all of the sins of the entire world so that everyone could be brought closer to God. It was in this moment that he would face the spiritual agony of being separated from his heavenly Father. And here we see Jesus grappling with the full realization of that and staggering from the overwhelming weight of the cup that he would drink. It's interesting because the name Gethsemane, this olive grove where they were hanging out that night, the name Gethsemane is actually a combination of Hebrew words that literally means oil press. And so what that means is that somewhere in the garden, in this grove of olive trees, there would have been this olive press, this oil press, right? And the way this worked was they would take these olives and they would crush them and put them in baskets, and then they would take this very heavy stone slab that they would lay on top of the basket of crushed olives, and very slowly the weight of this stone slab would press down on those crushed olives. And would squeeze out of them this oil, the olive oil that they used in basically every area of their daily lives. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Jesus is in a place that's called the oil press. And he's feeling crushed under the weight of the cup that he would drink. This overwhelming sorrow just pressing down on him as if to squeeze the very life from him. And I just want to make sure the irony of that isn't lost on us this morning. So Jesus, he looked at the cup, and it feels almost ridiculous to say it, but this was a hard thing that stood between Jesus and his destiny. And now he drops to his knees, and with sweat and tears being pressed out of him like drops of blood, and he begins to pray. And he turns to the Father and he calls him Abba, which in the language that Jesus spoke, Aramaic, the word Abba is like the most intimate form of father. It's like saying daddy or papa. And so Jesus begins to plead with him. He says, Papa, can you take this cup from me? Is there a way out? Is there any other possible way that this cup can be taken from me? And as one pastor explains this, he's begging the Father to carry out the mission some other way, but he doesn't ask him to abandon it altogether. Why? Because as horrible as the cup is, he knows that his immediate desire to be spared must bow before his ultimate one to spare us. And so Jesus closes his prayer with this: I want your will to be done, not mine. And Jesus prays this 3 times that night. 3 times, Papa, take this cup from me. And 3 times he closed by saying, your will, your plan, your way, not mine. And then jumping down to verse 41. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting me? And the disciples had fallen asleep on him a couple of times by this point. And he says, enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So now there's like this shift in the tone of Jesus as he's addressing his disciples who've been sleeping through most of this. But there's like this resolve in his words now, where there was this angst and this distress, because through his anguish at Gethsemane, Jesus had come to this conclusion. There's no other way. It's settled. He would do the hard thing. He would face his destiny. He would drink the cup. And here's what I hope we take away from this morning. And it's what we see in this pivotal moment in the life of Jesus and his journey toward the cross, but it's certainly true for every single one of us as well, that the road to our destiny always goes through a Gethsemane. The road to our destiny always goes through a Gethsemane. Listen, whatever you're doing right now, and whoever you are at this very moment, I want you to know that God has a bigger vision for your life and the person that you're becoming. And he wants to move you toward the person that you're destined to become. But there will always be a series of moments that stand before you, before every single one of us, and the destiny that he is leading us toward. Moments that will test us and moments that will press down on us, moments that will overwhelm us with the hard things that we have to do. And we'll never reach that destiny if we don't struggle with and feel the weight of and ultimately choose to do the hard things. Because these are the very things that will grow you and shape you and expand you to fill his vision for you. Because the road to your destiny will always take you through a Gethsemane. I mentioned a moment ago the woman that came over to the house that day to take care of the bat problem in our attic, right? So actually, she and her husband were good friends of ours. And in fact, all four of us had gone to college together. We had played sports together. We all graduated around the same time, and we got married around the same time, started our families around the same time, and then we ended up living just a few blocks from each other. So there was a season of life, like 4 to 5 years, where we did a lot of life with that couple. And they were good friends of ours at that time. And then, of course, as life goes, I mean, we kind of eventually went in different directions, and life just kind of took off. And so we had lost contact with them, hadn't been in touch with them for a lot of years, and really just kind of lost touch. And so we were shocked one Saturday night. This was just a couple of years ago. One Saturday night, out of the blue, Amanda gets a call from her. And she was hysterical. And Amanda was trying to figure out what's going on, and it was just hard to understand what she was saying. And it took her a little bit, but she finally realized and understood that her husband had taken his life that night. And she had found him just a few minutes before calling Amanda. And so we lived about 45 minutes away, and we got in the car, we headed down there, and we spent the next several hours that evening with her and her 3 kids as they navigated the aftermath of that awful and tragic, horrific thing. Easily the hardest thing Amanda and I have ever witnessed or walked through with anyone. And so then the next morning, it was Sunday, I was at church, standing backstage. I had a small part in the service that weekend, and I was getting ready to walk out onto the stage, and I got a text message, and it was her. And she was asking me if I felt comfortable doing the service for her husband. Now, I have to admit to you, when I read that text message, this felt like a hard thing. Another hard thing. And I know I'm a pastor, right? I mean, I've done funerals. But there was something different about this situation. This felt different. This was, I mean, I'd never done a service like this one before. I'd never done a service under these circumstances with someone so close and with so much history. And so this one just felt big. It felt heavy. And so I grappled with the weight of this, and I found myself thinking, I wonder if there's another way. I wonder if there's anyone else that would be better suited for this than me. I mean, I was scrambling for a way out. And as I wrestled with this and just processed this, I remember having this thought, and I don't know if it was this exact wording or not, but it was something along these lines. Just this thought that if you're ever going to become the person you were created to be, you're going to have to step into this and do the hard thing. And I really felt like God was challenging me and saying to me in that moment, listen, there's no other way. So stop looking for a way out and just look at me. Trust me. And just do it. Just do it. And so often that is our next step when we find ourselves facing these Gethsemane moments. These hard things that we know we have to do, these moments that stand between us and our destiny. And we wish there was some other way. We wish we could find a way out. But we have to do what Jesus showed us there in the garden that night. We have to come to a place of recognizing there's no way out of this. So just do it. And so for us this morning, whatever the hard thing is for you, that's the next step. There's no other way. So just trust and obey. There's no other way, so just trust and obey. I mean, if we want to move toward the people God created us to be, if we want to move toward our destiny, then we just have to accept There's no way around this Gethsemane moment. The only way is through it. So just trust and obey. But how do we do that? Right? I mean, that in of itself feels like a hard thing, right? So how do we do this? But again, as we watch Jesus in the garden that night, I mean, he shows us how. He shows us how. First of all, he surrounded himself with his people, right? You notice that he didn't go to Gethsemane alone, right? He took his disciples with him. These 12 guys that were the 11 at this point, one of them was off betraying him, but he had 11 of them with him that night, and he left a group of them there at the entrance of the garden, and then he took his 3 closest friends, right? His inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He took them a little further in. And I really just believe that I mean, he just needed them with him in that moment, right? To stand watch and to pray with them, he needed their presence. And that's a great reminder for all of us. That whatever we're walking through and the hard things that we have to do, I mean, we don't have to do them alone. In a vacuum, on our own, we need those people surrounding us. We need their encouragement. We need their support. So who do you have around you who can stand watch with you and pray for you and support you through your journey and through the hard things that you have to do? Because that is so crucial for every single one of us, including Jesus. But then the other thing that Jesus did that night, he depended on the Heavenly Father through prayer. I mean, look at this. I mean, this passage mentions prayer 4 times with an implied 5th time. And Jesus, I mean, probably spent as much as 3 hours in prayer that night. 3 hours in prayer. And these were not quiet, hands folded on bended knee kind of prayers. I mean, these were gut-wrenching, passionate, face down and writhing on the ground, blood, sweat, and tears kind of prayers. And so the application for us here is really simple. We'll never make it through our own Gethsemane without falling on our knees in total and complete dependence on God in prayer. Because it was only after his time in prayer with the Father that Jesus was able to accept there's no other way. And then he found the strength to trust and obey. And so then that led Jesus to do the third and final thing here. He surrendered to the Father's will. Again, 3 times he closed his prayer with this, not my will, but yours be done. In other words, and I'm going to borrow the words again from the late Tim Keller just one more time here. Jesus was saying in this moment, I trust you no matter what I'm feeling right now. I know that your desires are ultimately my desires. Do what we both know must be done. Listen, what are the hard things that you have to do today? What is the ultimate challenge that's standing between you and the person that you're destined to become? Whatever it is, can you share it with some close friends who are surrounding you and who will stand with you and who will pray for you and encourage you through this journey? And have you spent time praying about it and wrestling with it? And have you asked God for a way out and for another way? And by the way, that's okay. You can do that. And maybe he's already answered that prayer, and maybe it's not the answer you were looking for. Because maybe he's saying to you, there's no other way. Stop looking for a way out and just look at me. Because the road to your destiny goes through this Gethsemane moment. So whatever that moment looks like for you, will you simply say, like Jesus in the garden that night, I trust you no matter what I'm feeling right now. I know that we both want the same thing, and I know, and I trust that you want what's best for me. So let's do what we both know needs to be done. I'm ready to do the hard thing with your help. Father, your will be done, not mine. Let me pray for us. Father, would you give us the strength that we need in these moments that we face, these hard things that we need to do. We face them all the time. Some of them are big and some of them are small, but Father, each one of them, we know, grows us and shapes us into the person you've created us to be, the person that we're destined to become. So Father, as each of us have no doubt been thinking about this thing that's in front of us right now, this hard thing. Father, help us to see there's no other way but to walk through this with your help and with your strength. And God, would you grow us and expand us to become the people that you've created us to be. We love you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Cypress.